Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of Over the years, I've always wanted to read the cult classic House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. And every time I would go to the bookstore, I would pick it up, look through it, and feel a little too intimidated, and I would put it right back on the shelf. And over the years, I had heard a lot of people say that this was the most frightening thing they had ever read, or it was either completely pretentious and overrated. But nonetheless, every time I went back to the bookstore, for some reason, I was drawn back to this book to look at it a little bit more and try to comprehend it a little bit more. But still, I never purchased it. And there were even times I would take my friends to the bookstore with me and I would show them the book in its format and say, one day I'm going to read this. Well, last winter that day finally came, and I thought that I would read it immediately, but I didn't, but at least I went on and purchased the book. And from there, it sat on my shelf for a few months where I would go to it, flip through it, and I would frequently do this, and I actually became a little bit more comfortable with it by doing this. But one day last spring, I finally worked up the nerve to sit down and dedicate myself to the book. And as the words of my great friend Tammy would be, my damn, that was an experience. I'm going to try to sum this up in a nutshell if that's possible. This book has three storylines, two of which progress at the same time, and the third one emerges at the end in the form of letters from a mental institution. The foremost storyline features the character named Johnny, who is temporarily homeless, and he is also a tattooer's apprentice. Well, Johnny calls up his friend named Lude and explains the problem, so Lude gives him a couch to sleep on, and Johnny takes advantage of that. But when Johnny gets to Lude's apartment, he discovers that one of Lude's neighbors, which is this elderly blind man named Zappano, has recently died from what could have been natural causes. But there are some pretty creepy facts that surround Zappano's death. One of which is Zappano predicted when he was going to die, and also, Zappano had fed all of these stray cats that hung out in the apartment complex courtyard, but prior to his death, the cats had been found mutilated. Despite all of these weird facts that surrounded his death, Johnny and Lude decide to break into Zappano's apartment, and when they get in there, they discover that the floorboards look like something had tried to rip them up. But the strangest thing and the most important fact of this book is inside that apartment, they find a manuscript that has been written down on pages, receipts, napkins, etc. And so Johnny takes all of that, compiles it together, and this is where the second storyline emerges, which is known as the Navidson Record. Here we have the lead protagonist named Navidson, his girlfriend named Karen, and their two kids, which are Chad and Daisy. Eventually, Navy's twin brother Tom makes it into the story as well. But the concept is you have Navy, who was a famous photographer, and Karen, who was a famous model. And they've decided to give up the city life and the fast-paced life and settle down in this quaint little house on Ash Tree Lane. And their goal is to finally set some roots and start a real close family and just start developing some memories. So Navy decides that he's going to do a documentary on them setting their roots. And this is pretty important to him because him and Tom grew up without parents. Well, everything's moving along fine until one day in June where Navy and his family decide to go to a wedding, and when they return, they discover that a closet has appeared out of nowhere, and this closet goes from their bedroom to the children's bedroom. So they call authorities, the cops come out, they don't know what to make of it, and Navy calls his brother, which Tom shows up and tries measuring the place. He does everything possible to try to make reason of what's going on. And there's really no answer that they can conceive from all of this. Well, before anything surfaces, such as a rational explanation, about a month passes, and out of nowhere, a 5.5 minute hallway appears in the middle of their home. And the creepiest part to this is the hallway is a gateway between our world and some super creepy underworld. I saw in an interview, which is available on YouTube, that Mark Danielewski mentions he and his sister endured a pretty harsh childhood. This includes their overbearing father forcing them to be pawns in his divorce, and their mother suffering from a nervous breakdown. After I knew this, I could see where their reality possibly influenced sections of this novel, especially the parts with Johnny's backstory. Before anyone thinks Mark Z. Danielewski is the only famous family member, think again. His sister Ann Danielewski was the front woman of the alternative music group Poe. Although Mark says her album Haunted is a companion to House of Leaves, there are songs on her debut album Hello that echo the same novel. Specific songs include Hello and her most infamous work, Angry Johnny. Mark claims the two go hand in hand because while Ann would write songs, he would listen to them and write House of Leaves. Fun facts. Okay, so first off, we have the title page. And you see Mark Z. Danielewski's name. It is intended that you remove this page. And this is the only page in the book that quickly and easily tears away without causing damage, and it leaves the book with the title House of Leaves by Zampano and Johnny. This is to give you the illusion that Danielewski has nothing to do with this book whatsoever, and this is a script directly from those two characters. Secondly, there are 4 different fonts that are in this book. And this is so that your eyes can easily adjust and you can tell by a quick glance what storyline you're reading. Examples are Times New Roman. All right, so the Navidson record is written all in Times New Roman. And Johnny's footnotes, these are all written in Courier. Now, Johnny's mom, Pelafina, she has letters that are all written in the font known as Dante. And so these are the 3 storylines. But of course, you have to have the editors have their say as well. So the editors, all of their notes are in Bookman. Now, the third thing I want to touch on here is going to be chapter 5, I believe it is. And it's where the book goes into the properties of sound. And in this chapter, you get this whole backstory and definition and history of the word echo. And with it, you have this whole mythological side as well. So even though it seems like this really has no place in the book, and it might feel like it's just a filler, still read it. Read it and take it all in, because as you continue reading the book, when this word comes back up, everything just hits you at once. Every time that word is mentioned, your mind goes back to that chapter and it hits. At the bottom of page 97, you will see that there is a check mark. Pay attention to this check mark because it is significant to the book, and once you make it to the end of the book, you'll understand why that check mark is there. Chapter 13, I believe. This is going to be called the Minotaur. In this chapter, you get the history of the Minotaur, and of course this is like the mythological history of the Minotaur and how it's intended to be in a maze, which the maze is very relevant inside the house itself. But I tend to think that maybe the Minotaur is really a catalyst for maybe Johnny and his family life. But this speaks so differently and openly, I think a lot of people have different opinions on this. Now, another thing is there are multiple ways to read this book. And what I mean by that is you can read the book from beginning to end, reading nothing but the Navidson record. And then you can go all the way back to the beginning and read nothing but Johnny's footnotes. Personally, I think that if you were to do it that way, the book would be more confusing and the ending would not have as much of a payoff. Personally, I read everything together at once, the Navidson record and all the footnotes all together, and I flipped through the book to the appendices at the end, which it instructs you when to do that. And I think that if you were to simply just start at the beginning and follow all the way through, the ending would have such a better payoff. Aside from that, the final thing I want to touch on is House is always in blue. And there's a few different speculations on this. One is House is in blue because it is supposed to represent a link that you are to click on, like through the internet. That's one that I had heard floating around. But what I've also heard is the house being in blue is actually supposed to represent a blue screen, which is no different than a green screen. And this is so your mind can expand or contract the house at will whenever you see that word. So it allows your brain to trigger in and think, okay, this is where the imagination opens up to bigger or smaller. So those are some of the things that you need to know when you enter the book. So now that I've covered that, it is time that I move on to the spoilers. And of course, if you have not read this book and you don't want anything spoiled for you, click away. There is a link in the comments section that I'm going to pin at the top of the comments. All you have to do is scroll down the page, get to the comments section, click on that timestamp, and it will redirect you past all the spoilers to where the thoughts section of this video is. You only have 17 seconds to do this. So ready, set, go. Now that everyone has had a chance to click away, I just want to speak about some of my favorite moments and also some moments that scared the hell out of me. One moment that really impressed me, and it's because so much gets packed into it at once, is the moment when the teacher, Miss Brooks, goes to the house because she suspects there's child abuse. Pretty much she's Chad's teacher, and she's noticed that he's been drawing these really weird black voids in class. Well, she ends up going to Daisy's teacher and she sees Daisy has been doing the same thing. So she takes matters into her own hands and she goes to the house to confront the family and see what's going on. Well, little does she know, she's arrived at a moment where literally all hell has broken loose. And what I mean by this is a few moments before she knocks on the door, Tom has returned from the 5.5-minute hallway with the other explorers, and he has explained to Karen that Navy has been swallowed alive by the house. Well, Karen is freaking out because she wants to go save Navy, but she's terrified of the dark, and also she's claustrophobic. By the way, this is our cat, May. Hey, May. I don't know if you can see him, but here he is. Anyway, back to the subject. So, Karen is claustrophobic and scared of the dark, so she cannot go save Navy. At the same time, the character Wax and also his partner, they have been shot while they were in the abyss of the house. And the thing is, the partner is dead and Wax is bleeding out everywhere, and they are just simply trying to keep it calm so Wax will not die. But all hell's breaking loose. There's no way to stay calm. So as this is going down, you have Reston, who is trying to call for an emergency, and he thinks that when the knock comes to the door, it's already emergency who's arrived. So when he answers it, he's kind of surprised to see it's not emergency, but the children's teacher. And by the way, the kids are in the middle of all this, like just freaking out over what's going on. So the kicker to this moment is when authorities finally arrive, Karen tries to get them to go into the 5.5 minute hallway to save Navy. But the authorities are like, peace, no, So that's a no-go. Now, some of the scenes that really just scared the hell out of me, oh, there's so many, but I'm going to start with the mildest and work my way up from there. With Johnny, there are moments where he believes he sees something with red eyes looking at him when he looks out into the courtyard. He believes he sees this figure looking back at him, just gazing. And the way that scene's presented, it makes me want to pull the curtains. And another moment that was really neat is when Johnny is at the tattoo parlor and he imagines his boss becoming this humanoid monster thing. And for him, the moment is so real, he literally like pisses and craps himself. And even though that moment wasn't scary for me, it was still pretty cool to see how it played out. But the eyes in the dark that he sees in the courtyard, that topped the scary moment for Johnny's perspective. Now, as far as the Davidson record goes, there are tons of creepy moments in this. And what I mean by that is when they explore in the house beyond the 5-minute hallway, 5.5-minute hallway, they come to a staircase that leads them down. And this leads them into a maze. Well, the thing is, the further they go into this maze and into the abyss of the house, there's this disembodied growling that circles them. And sometimes it's closer, sometimes it's further away. And even though you never see the creature, it's like you're in this place that makes you uncomfortable to start with. And through the power of suggestion, there's something in there with you that you do not want to see, but it's getting closer. And also, as they're exploring this area, they've been marking the walls. And something has been going behind them, clawing out the markings. And again, it never tells you what this thing is, but it's creepy as hell. Now, in the Davidson record, it actually brings a little bit more context into it, which makes it 100 times more creepier, even though this context should be peaceful, but it's not. Pretty much you have where the Bible is quoted, specifically where Jesus says, in my Father's house there are many rooms. If there weren't, I would have told you so. But at the same time, in the footnotes, you have Joseph, and where he has been quoted from the Bible, where he says, like, oh my God, I'm trying to think of the correct terminology that he used. How dreadful is this place? This is nothing more than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. I believe that's the quote that it is. I've never been one who can really quote Bible scripture, but in a nutshell, I believe you know what I'm talking about. And adding that into everything just makes it even more frightening. And so those are some scenes that will stick with me for probably until the day I die. Ain't that right, May? Okay, sorry about that. I had to collect my thoughts a little bit, and there were too many cats around me, and I really need to focus on this because I'm about to really try to rationalize everything I've read. And for those who have read this book, please, please, please give me your 2 cents worth on it, because I have not really decided on what perspective is really real here. And what I mean by that is, okay, so Pelafina is insane. She's delusional, and it shows this in her letters that she writes to Johnny. She flip-flops between loving him, hating him, praising him, and then bashing him, and the letters are just insane, especially when she writes the letter that you have to decode, and what she writes in that is just, it's chilling, absolutely chilling. But here's the thing, Pelafina, all of her letters are in Dante font, And let me just go on and make note here. I find it interesting that Dante is the font that everything she writes is in, because it's a reference to Dante's Inferno, and perhaps this is showing her decline in insanity, or maybe even her descent into hell. But also at the front of the book, where it shows the title page with Zampino and Johnny on it, that looks like it's actually in Dante. And if it is, then the whole story is told from Pelafina's perspective, and everything could be a delusion, even Johnny. But at the same time, Johnny does exist, because in one of the letters that she writes him, when she thinks that the orderlies are not getting him her letters, she requests that he put a check mark at the bottom of the next letter he sends her, which is where the check mark comes in on page 97. So this is proof that Johnny exists. If we were to look at it from this perspective, then maybe this is all his delusion. Maybe this is his delusion. He has inherited his mother's insanity, and also with him being on drugs and such, that's messing him up even more. So perhaps if this were the case, maybe Zampano and the Navidson record don't exist, and this is nothing more than him trying to rationalize his life and his spirituality through a false manuscript. But also at the same time, let's consider maybe the Navidson record really does exist. And if it does, then maybe it's cursed, because the thing is, as Johnny reads this, the further he goes, the more he goes insane. It's like Jack Nicholson in The Shining, like the location influenced him to go insane. And this is how the manuscript is doing Johnny. So in the off chance that the manuscript is real, it could be cursed, and it could be affecting him that way. Or it could be that if it is real, he is simply having his delusions and drug abuse come in and making him react to it in this manner. So those are the three scenarios that I've been able to draw to. I read this book about a month ago, and I still don't know exactly which one to go with. So please let me know your insight on this. I honestly have no complaints whatsoever about the characters in this book. They are all very well developed. They are so dimensional, and they are gray characters, which are some of my favorite kinds of characters. At one point in time or another, every single character in this book I felt sorry for, or I felt like they were just stuck in a bad situation and they were reacting the only way they knew how to, which was out of panic or chaos. And so I don't necessarily think this book really had evil characters. They were just flawed human beings. And if we were to look at this from the Navidson record, the book is essentially a love story. And this is something where we see Navy and Karen have bought a house to bring them closer together so they can establish family roots, but the house brings them further apart. And in the process of doing so, it makes it where they have to grow as individuals. They have to grow and overcome their obstacles, and they have to be able to just rid themselves of everything that's been holding them back, which they do because they end up getting married after they had never had an interest in getting married. And Karen even overcomes her fear of dark places and claustrophobia. And it really brings into perspective, what would you do to save the person you loved? Which this kind of goes into two moments that really ripped my heart out. Tom is one of the most lovable persons ever put on page. Again, he is a flawed individual just like everyone else. But at the same time, you can't help but love Tom because he's just so humorous and charismatic, and you can tell he really loves his niece and nephew and his brother, and he has such a big heart. And the moment when the house literally eats him, it ripped my heart out. I had to put the book down just to be able to comprehend the fact that Tom was gone. And I've never been like that with a book before, where I've had to just put it down and come to the realization that one of my favorite characters is dead. So this was the first time that ever happened. Later on, I had to put the book down a second time when I thought Navy was dead. And I had almost finally given up because I did not think there was going to be any happy ending whatsoever in the Davidson record. And I'm glad that I continued reading, because there was as close to a happy ending as could possibly be for this subject. But if we were to look at it from Johnny's perspective, there is no happy ending. This is just some bleak, desolate stuff. And truth be it, I really wish that I had not chugged all that alcohol in the video of Meg, because I could really go for that entire bottle after pondering this and reminiscing about all the emotions that I went through with this. But I don't have that, and truth be it, I am too deep in thought about this book to even be a smartass about it. So, sorry, there's no great zingers on this section like how it has been on the other videos. Maybe next time. This is a mind-melting book, and I believe it changes in the eye of the beholder. In the past, this has been called pretentious, it's been called a love story, a mock of academia, and horror. And I know what I'm about to say is blasphemy, but you can forget Stephen King, forget H.P. Lovecraft, forget Clive Barker, and forget Edgar Allan Poe. This is honestly the scariest crap I've ever read in my life. And even though there are undertones of a love story to it, this is a literature horror book if there ever was one. And the thing is, it's not gory, it's not gruesome or overtly explicit, it's just so damn creepy. And I know a lot of people are intimidated by this book, like how I was, because of the format. But if you seriously just pick up the book and read it one page at a time, taking in everything that it has to offer, then this is a pretty easy read. And thankfully, the author uses a pretty simplistic verbiage as he writes. Now, I will admit, as we're on the topic of fonts, that the book did somewhat affect me. And what I mean by that is it affected me in two ways. One, there's a section of it where the pages are maybe for about 50, 60 pages, maybe a little less, but it seemed like it was a lot more. But the pages only have one word or one sentence or maybe one paragraph on that page. And so the thing is, you're turning the pages constantly to be able to read a word or a sentence, something that's very short. And in a small amount of time, you finish a good portion of the book. And to the physical eye, it does not seem possible. And it feels like you've gone into this time warp. But in all honesty, it's just been an illusion brought on by the book. Another moment that really just freaked me out was when Davidson went into the underworld of the house by himself. And the thing is, the book is twisting and turning, and you're getting the exact same experience that Davidson is experiencing as he's going through this abyss. And what I mean by that, by twisting and turning, is, again, there are a few words on each page, and you are having to turn the book sideways, upside down, counterclockwise, so on and so forth, in order to be able to read what he's experiencing. And you have to do this at such a fast rate that I personally lost track of what the front or back was of the book. And at one point I had to take my bookmark and put it in the book so I could continue to tell the difference between front and back, up or... What the... As far as the social commentary is concerned, there could be two different commentaries depending on what storyline you're looking at. But if you're looking at it from the Navidson record, the book is essentially a love story that is about redemption or trying to be redeemed, especially in regards to Navy and the photo he took, which was a Pulitzer Prize winning photo, despite the fact that, you know, it was not a nice photo whatsoever. But he's had grief over this for some time and a lot of guilt. But the photo was actually inspired by another image that you can find online, which I would warn people to Google this at your own discretion because it's not a nice image at all. But the photo is called The Struggling Girl. And in real life, this photo ended up getting a Pulitzer Prize, and supposedly the photographer killed himself not long thereafter. So if you do want to Google that, do so. And that is the image that inspired the photo Navy took. But once again, just do it at your own risk. If we're looking at the book from a social commentary standpoint from Johnny, it really focuses on drug abuse and mental health. Honestly, I thought this was going to be a chore to read, but it wasn't. I loved it from beginning to end. It sucked me into its void very quickly on, and the best way I can sum this up is to say it does for books what the Blair Witch Project did for movies. And you can throw some David Lynch in there as well. So if you want your mind really messed with and you want to get creeped out, this is a book that I cannot recommend enough. Go grab it. It is not available on ebook or Audible. It's only available in print. So this is the only version you're going to be able to find of it. The questions that I have for you at the end of this video are: do you believe dimensions exist? Why or why not? Personally, I believe they do, or at least a spiritual dimension. And the reason why I say I believe that is because I've had a lot of spiritual experiences throughout my life. And in a sense, this book does have a great deal of spiritual commentary and context to it. And another question is, what books would you recommend that are creepy or disturbing, that might be about houses? These can be murder houses, haunted houses, possessed houses, houses that open up into other dimensions. Anything that will be based on a home that is creepy, I would love to have that book recommendation. So please leave those in the comments. Also, I would just like to say thank you to Alicia Graves and Joseph Baylott for contributing to my Patreon. I will continue doing videos regardless, but if you do contribute to my Patreon page, I will give you a shout out at the end of my videos. And if you would like to do this, the link to that is going to be in the description section of this video, as well as links to my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So until next time, you know what to do. Hit subscribe, click that notifications bell, and sweet nightmares.